Hello once again. I've got another typewriter to show you in today's video, and it's a different kind of typewriter than we've looked at previously. This is a Brother Fairmont Automatic 12. It's an electric typewriter made in 1978. The two typewriters I have shown on this channel beforehand, the Smith Corona CXL 4200, which now belongs to Bridget, and the Xerox 6010 memory writer, those were both electronic typewriters. Basically daisy wheel printers tethered to a keyboard. Well, this is not an electronic typewriter. There is no electronics in this. This is just an electric typewriter. It's electromechanical. It is very similar mechanically to a standard manual typewriter where the force of your finger pushing the button is what causes the type bar to swing up and strike the page. Electric typewriters are very similar to manual typewriters, but instead of you having to use your finger to punch the key to make the type bar hit the paper, in an electric typewriter, a continuously running electric motor turns a little bar with some lobes on it, and when you press a key, the linkage that connects the key to its appropriate type bar hits that spinning bar with the lobes, and the force of the spinning lobes hitting that linkage throws the type bar onto the paper. So what you get is a typewriter that functions quite similarly to a manual typewriter, but because it's electromechanically actuated, the force needed to push the buttons is far, far less. Typing on one of these isn't too different than typing on a modern computer keyboard or an electronic typewriter. It no longer depends on a lot of force pushing the key to strike the letter onto the page. Electric typewriters coincided alongside manual typewriters for pretty much their entire existence. Manual typewriters and electric typewriters exited the market at around the same time. Around the mid to late 80s was when the last manual and electric typewriters were made. By that point, they had been entirely replaced by electronic typewriters and, of course, personal computers. This particular unit, the Brother Fairmont Automatic 12, is a member of the JP-12 series of Brother typewriters. Brother and Smith Corona and probably others, they tended to make several models of typewriter based on the same mechanical chassis. The only difference was, the cosmetic styling and maybe a couple of features. So the Fairmont Automatic 12 was one of a few typewriters in the Brother JP-12 family of typewriters. So let's take a look. We'll start up here. This isn't the case for all electric typewriters, but it's 90% the case for the later ones, including this one. The Carriage is actually a power return. So while I can, manually push it to return it just like on a manual typewriter, it actually has a power return. You just hit the return key and the carriage will automatically return. That's driven by the motor. You've got your rubber platen, which cleaned up very well. It was quite dirty at first, but I scrubbed at it for a long time and managed to clean it up quite well. Your paper bail right here. Here you can set your margins. So these tabs just slide back and forth, and where you have them set will actually dictate mechanically how far the carriage is allowed to move. When you hit return, the carriage will stop at where the left margin is, and when you're typing, the carriage will stop at where the right margin is, and the bell will sound 5 characters before the right margin. So just like a manual typewriter, and just about any typewriter, save for the electronic ones that replace the bell with a beeper, this actually has a physical bell in it. When the carriage nears the right margin, a little hammer, a little spring-loaded hammer, strikes the bell, and that lets you know you're close to the right margin and you better think about doing a carriage return. This releases the paper so you can easily pull it out or insert it. This little tab right here sets your line spacing, 1, 1.5, or 2 lines in the case of this typewriter. If you put it up into the R section, doing a carriage return will not advance the page, and you can see the platen is loose. Whereas when it's in any of the other modes, it's ratcheted. Over here is your carriage release. So when you pull on this, and you got to be careful because the carriage will want to swing to the left, so you want to get a good hold of it before you hit the carriage release. You can move the carriage wherever you want within the boundaries of the margins you set. You can see when I near the right margin, the bell sounds 5 characters before the right margin. So that is that. This cover opens up. Let's take a look at that. So the first thing you probably notice is the ribbon. This typewriter uses a standard 2-inch spool ribbon like 90% of manual and electric typewriters used, which is very nice because these are still made. You can still buy these brand new. I bought this one brand new. You can get them on eBay for $6, and like I said, 90% of manual and electric typewriters use these. They're very easy to change, and they're very easy to thread once you learn how to properly thread them, which I didn't know at first. When I first got this thing, I got this with a ribbon, but it was a black only ribbon, and I wanted to change it out for this ribbon you see here that's black and red. It's actually the same type of ribbon that you use in an adding machine with a two color ribbon printer, because this typewriter has the ability to use a second color on the lower half of the ribbon. So I replaced the original all black ribbon with this black and red one, and I didn't pay attention to how it was threaded, and I originally threaded it incorrectly, and I was having problems with the ribbon binding up as I was typing, but eventually I asked on a forum, and somebody taught me how to properly thread the ribbon in this. If I just manually swing a type bar up here, let me set the ribbon color to the red setting. That's this switch right here. White is stencil mode, so the type bars won't actually hit the ribbon at all. You're meant to use a stencil. I have no idea what that means, but that's what that setting's for. But I'll put on the red setting. When I manually move a type bar, you can see the movable piece here. This is actually called the vibrator. The vibrator comes up so that the letter of the type bar strikes the red part of the ribbon. But you can see, I'll give you a look there, that is how the ribbon is supposed to thread on one of these. It's auto-reversing, so when it gets to the end of the ribbon, the tension of the ribbon at its end automatically flips the little things here, and that changes it up so that the ribbon starts running in the other direction. So the ribbon just goes back and forth, and it'll do that many, many times before it's actually dry and you'll have to change the ribbon. From what I've seen, typewriter ribbons go dry from age before they ever go dry from use, which is nice. They last a very, very long time, decades. That all black ribbon might have been the original one that goes to this thing, I don't know. But there you go, and this is called the type basket, where all the type bars are. You can see all the type bars have 2 characters on them. Let me spin this around. 2 characters on the type bar. The bottom character is what hits the page when you don't have the carriage shifted. And then the character stamped on the upper part of the type bars is what will hit the page when you hit shift. On about half, maybe more, I'm not sure, but about half of manual and electric typewriters, when you hit shift, the carriage literally shifts upwards. That's where the name shift comes from. And that changes where the key hits the platen, so that the shifted character hits the platen instead of the smaller character. On an electric typewriter like this is obviously motor actuated. I hit shift, you can see power shift, and it doesn't do anything because it's not turned on right now. Snap this cover back on. Let's take a look at the keyboard and the other controls here. Here's your power switch. Here's your keyboard. It's a pretty familiar looking keyboard. Spacing is actually mechanical. It's not electrically actuated. And it has a repeat space, so when you hold this down, it quickly ratchets space to space. So that's the repeat space. You got shift keys on each side, and you've got a shift lock. So this is akin to a caps lock in a computer. You hit shift lock and it locks the shift key down. But of course, unlike a caps lock, which shifts only the letters, shift lock on a typewriter shifts everything. So when you hit the number keys, it's going to type the shifted symbol and not the number. To undo the shift lock, you just hit shift. MR is margin release. So if I get to the right margin, for example, but I want to keep typing past it, I can hit margin release. It releases the margins. And now I can keep going past the right margin. If I want to type before the left margin, I press margin release, and in this case I can move it all the way back. You can actually hold margin release and press power return, and the power return will go all the way to the left. Of course, before the days of computers, what characters you got on here wasn't exactly standardized yet. For example, for 6 you have a cent symbol, which is kind of neat. And for period and comma, if you do a shift, you just get another period and another comma, which is kind of funny. Here's a key you don't see on a computer keyboard normally, 1/2 or 1/4. That's about it. There's a backspace key. That is electrically actuated, needs to be running for backspace to work. You also get a tab key. That's not electrically actuated. There are preset tabs at every 10 characters on this particular typewriter. So if I go to the very left and hit tab, oops, sometimes it doesn't like to catch. Let's try that again. There. The catch must be a little bit gummy on this maybe, because sometimes it does like to move way over. But you can see, hit margin release. You get tabs every 10 spaces. Some manual and electric typewriters let you set your own tabs. This isn't one of them. The Brother JP-12 machines, in the grand scheme of vintage typewriters, they're not well loved, simply because these were not incredibly high quality machines. There's nothing particularly wrong with these. They were just built cheap. The housing on this is entirely plastic, whereas earlier machines like the Smith Coronas up until the 60s, for example, they were all metal. They had an all metal housing. But later manual and electric typewriters like this one, they were housed in a plastic enclosure, just, you know, to make them cheaper. And there were also some cost-cutting measures done to the chassis itself, too. This particular typewriter has an issue. I have since fixed it. I've had to fix it twice, so I fixed it once. It fixed the issue, but then it occurred again about a week later. So I've fixed it again. Hopefully it'll work for this video, but I won't be surprised if it happens again. This thing doesn't like to shift. You hit the shift key and the carriage will come up and then immediately fall back down. And the reason it's doing that is because when you hit shift, it allows a lobe to spin, sort of a cam with a lobe on it to spin, and a linkage connecting to the carriage rests on that cam. So when the cam spins to a certain point, the linkage goes up on that lobe and it causes the carriage to shift. Well, on this typewriter, that lobe's made of plastic. It is one of the only parts of the chassis of this typewriter that's made of plastic instead of metal, and wouldn't you know it, it's a part that failed. So I've done a really crude fix. I put a little, it hasn't failed, it's just worn down because it's plastic. And you know, every time you do a shift, the metal linkage that goes to the carriage rides along that cam, and it just wore down the lobe to the point where now instead of getting caught on the cam as it's supposed to, it just skips right past it and the carriage unshifts by itself, even though you have the shift button depressed. I added a little dab of Gorilla Glue to where the lobe is, and that raised the lobe enough where it works properly again, but it'll probably quit working again at some point. And yeah, it's one of the few parts in this thing that's made of plastic inside. And that's why these typewriters just aren't well loved. The plastic enclosure and the fact that some of the parts are made in plastic, which in other typewriters would have been made of metal. So these aren't well loved. You can get these cheap. I got this at a thrift store. I forget what I paid for it, $5 or $10 probably. You know, even if this was in 100% perfect shape, they're just not worth much at all. They're not worth hardly a thing. If this thing ends up not shifting properly again, I'm just going to give it to a thrift store. I'm not even going to try selling it on eBay because these aren't worth anything, especially once you factor in the shipping costs. This weighs like 15 pounds. And nobody's going to want to, you know, pay the shipping costs for a not well-loved typewriter that doesn't even work 100%. It's too bad. When I got this thing, it did work 100%. The shifting problem happened. It started a couple of weeks after I got it, so that's really dumb. I just thought of another control that I forgot about here. It's this one right here. It's H and L. This adjusts how heavy it takes, how much force it takes to press a key. Putting it on H makes it, you know, a little bit heavier. I wouldn't say as heavy as a manual typewriter. Maybe something a little bit heavier than a Model M, maybe. Whereas when you put it on L, it makes it a bit lighter and more closer to like a modern computer keyboard. Here's a profile shot. The power cord is detachable, which is nice. Oh, and I almost forgot. I always forget this thing has this. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't until a little while ago I realized this thing had this. I didn't think it had it at all. But on the back, it's got a little backrest that flips up for the page, so the page doesn't just fall over backwards. It was only a few days ago I realized this had this. I didn't know it had it because it's really well hidden. Show you a back view here. And there's where it's hidden, right here. Take a look at the info plate on the back. Says Brother, model number 3612. There's a serial number, second digit 8 tells me this is 1978. You can't get the decade from the serial number, but I do know these particular models were sold during the 1970s. And it was made in Japan by Brother Industries. So, that's pretty much the lowdown of this thing. I'll turn it on. And because I was hitting the shift key while it was off, the carriage bounced when I turned it on. But you can hear it running. Oh, you can see it running too. It's got a C-frame shaded pole motor inside it. The carriage shift is still working. So you can see how the shift works. Oh, and this is cool. Some of the keys, if you press down really hard, they're repeating. So for example, let me hit Backspace. See it Backspace, but if I press a little bit harder and hold it, it's got a repeating key. Let me put the ribbon on the stencil mode because I don't have a page in yet. The dash and the period are repeating keys too. So I press it once, and if I hold it, that type bar is a little bit gummy. It's retracting far slower than it should. The period's a bit better though. Let me hold the period. Hit return. If you hit return when the carriage is already in the full return position, that's fine. It'll just advance the page. And that's pretty much it. So let me stick a piece of paper in this thing and we'll do a little demonstration. I'll put our little back plane up and I'll stick the paper in here, lining up the left edge with the 0 mark. And apparently I released the platen already, so I'll put it back, bring it up, bring up the paper bale, put down the paper bale, and there you go. You've loaded a piece of paper. So let me turn this on again and do a little typing test here. Oh, put the ribbon on the black setting. And obviously I'm not paying attention to what I'm typing, but you can see there. Very cool, it makes quite a racket. Let me switch the ribbon to the red setting. So yeah, there you go. Show the little fraction characters here. And now, lesbians on typewriters. Oh, look at you.
That was satisfying, feeling that kick on. I'm gonna do that again. It didn't do that little, like, ka-choo. How do you move down?
What do you mean? Yeah, hit return, yeah.
Ooh. Man, that smell.
You like it?
It's a nostalgic smell.
I don't smell it. Oh, I smell it now.
It smells like motor and ink.
Yeah, it smells like old electrical stuff.
How do I make it?
You turn the platen by hand. Those are little knobs on the sides.
Oh. Oh my god.
Or actually, there's a little rod that you can... Yeah, I think that loosens it, so you can just pull it straight out. Yeah.
But that was kind of nice, too.
So, something you've got to get used to is most manual and electric typewriters do not have a correction function. If you make a mistake, you either have to cross it out and keep writing, like I've done here, or you have to grab the whiteout and actually white out the mistake you made and then type over top of it. Some manual and electric typewriters had a correction function, but it wasn't like what the modern electronic typewriters have with the lift-off tape. Typewriters like this that have a correction feature, which this doesn't have, they actually use a special ribbon that's the ordinary black on the top, but then it has whiteout-like material on the bottom. And what you do if you make a mistake is you have to back up to where you made the mistake, switch the ribbon selection to the to use the white part, and then punch the key that was accidentally pressed, and it punches whiteout over top of it. And then when you've done that, you can just keep on writing. We'll give another look. Like I said, this ribbon's brand new, so it's really nice. Really nice dark print. Oh, and I should mention, of course, I mentioned this in the video of the Smith Corona CXL 4200, because that electronic typewriter doesn't have a bold function, but you can simulate bold print by just typing the same letter multiple times over top of each other. So if I turn this on, and I want to write in bold, I can just hit a letter, put the right color, hit a letter, back up, hit the same letter again, and just do that a few times, and then do it for all the other letters. Oops. So you can see the difference there. So that's how you can get bold print on one of these. Same thing for underlining. I've shown this before, I'll show it again because I'm sure I have quite a few viewers who've never used a typewriter. If I want to underline something, I type what I want to underline, and then I back up to the first letter, and then I hold shift and just type an underscore. And there you go, you've underlined something, and that was the original purpose of the underscore character, was literally to underscore stuff, to underline stuff. And of course, if you're really fast with your fingers, you can just hold the key down and repeat it like that. There you go, that's how you can get bold and underline. That's about all there is to show of the Brother Fairmont Automatic 12 electric typewriter from 1978. All in all, it's a nicely featured electric typewriter with the dual color selection and the adjustable key weight, the power shift, the power return. Not all electric typewriters had a power return. Some of them were still manual return. The margin release, the tabs every 10 characters. It's a nicely featured typewriter, and it also types nicely. But sadly, these simply weren't the highest quality typewriters. All plastic enclosure makes them not well loved by typewriter collectors, and it makes these things have practically no value, which is great because they're common, and if you want an electric typewriter, these are a really easy way to get one because they're super common and cheap to get. As far as, you know, the actual build quality goes, these aren't it. They're a perfectly fine typewriter, just all plastic, and of course in the case of this one, a plastic chassis component has failed, causing it to not function properly. I have fixed that. I'm not sure how well my fix is going to hold. If it ends up not holding and the shift doesn't work on this thing again, I'm just going to get rid of this. I'm going to donate it to a thrift store. Oh, I forgot to show the case. Pretty much all typewriters, you know, when you bought them, they would come with a nice plastic suitcase-like case. Let me show the case for this real quick. Here's the case that I got this in. And when you open it up, there's where you can store the typewriter. Keep it safe, carry it around with you. And it actually says they're made in Japan, and it actually says JP-12. So this case was used on all the brother JP-12 typewriters. But there you go. A look at a later model, sort of lower end build quality, but still pretty nicely featured electric typewriter. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys later.